Last week, we talked about how Taiwan keeps getting pulled outward. Everyone wants something from us, more chips, more AI capacity, more regional security cooperation, and more help countering disinformation. And Taiwan has been showing that it can rise to meet these demands, whether it's through new AI investments, vocational training, or a clear vision for the T-Dome defense system. The message was, we'll engage the world, but we'll do it on our terms. But this week, the focus shifted inwards because on paper, Taiwan is about to have a banner year. The economy is forecast to grow 7.37% in 2025, the highest in 15 years, and likely one of the highest in the world. GDP per capita is set to hit almost $38,000, and inflation is expected to stay low. ICT products now make up 45% of exports, electronics another 30%, and companies like Nvidia, Google, and AMD keep expanding their footprint in Taiwan. If you're looking at the numbers alone, Taiwan looks like it's on a rocket ship, but that rocket is sitting on a base that's getting a little thinner. Traditional industries are being squeezed. Tariffs are driving up furloughs. More than 400 companies have already applied for export relief funding, and population decline means there simply aren't enough workers to go around. And that's why heavy industries in place like Kaohsiung have seen output slide, and why the labor shortages coming in 2028 aren't just a forecast. They're a warning. And this is where the healthcare stories suddenly matter again. President Lai once again pushes medical tech as Taiwan's next big pillar. 3 ministries just teamed up on medical diplomacy, and these aren't just side stories. They're about building resilience at home so Taiwan doesn't drift towards a Lebanon-style import dependency or Argentina-style export trap. We're going to talk about all of that today here on Beyond the Reefs. Hi, you're listening to Beyond the Reefs, a show produced by Radio Taiwan International. Here we talk about socio-economic issues that are faced by Taiwan and their broader impact around the world beyond the reefs of this island nation. Taiwan's traditional manufacturing sector took another hit this week, and that's one of the headline news, as the Labor Ministry reported a rise in tariff-driven furloughs, now affecting more than 9,100 workers across 456 companies. The majority of affected firms are in metal manufacturing, machinery, and consumer goods, exactly the industries that once anchored Taiwan's broader export ecosystem. Although small and medium enterprises, SMEs, still make up about 90% of cases, the latest surge came from several large manufacturers, each furloughing more than 150 employees due to order cuts tied to the U.S. retaliatory tariffs. Officials are saying that this marks the highest number of furloughed workers since the tariff dispute began in August. Many factories are now reducing hours to avoid layoffs, but the trend, highlights how external trade pressure is directly hitting Taiwan's labor market at a time when the population is already shrinking and younger workers are increasingly gravitating towards tech-driven industries. So this is part of Taiwan's economic story that doesn't show up in those growing 7.37% GDP forecasts. Taiwan is riding a historic tech boom, but it's doing so with traditional industries that are quietly absorbing the costs of global uncertainty, demographic decline, and an export structure that leans heavily towards a few high-tech, in fact, sectors. What the furlough numbers reveal is a deeper structural weakness, an economy that has concentrated so much value at the top that the base beneath is thinning. Metal factories, for example, machinery producers, and high labor industries simply don't have the cushion to absorb tariff hits. Nor do they have enough younger workers entering the field to rebuild the next cycle. Taiwan's economic momentum right now is real, but it's incredibly uneven. And if the country doesn't address these imbalances, the workforce pressure in these sectors will become a limiting factor on growth, not just a side effect. And that fear that traditional industries can't withstand another shock is exactly why hundreds of companies are already lining up for a government support. The next story shows just how desperate firms have become to survive in an export environment that no longer plays by old rules. The Economic Ministry says more than 411 companies have filed applications for its 10 million new Taiwan dollars export assistance program, a rapid spike that underscores how widespread the tariff impact has become. The initiative is designed to help exporters secure new orders by subsidizing overseas exhibitions, diversifying market strategies, strengthening digital marketing capabilities, and creating new direct-to-buyer channels. Taiwan is also opening new Taiwan trade and investment centers in Japan, the Czech Republic, and the United States, offering one-stop services for firms seeking expansion into alternative markets. According to the ministry, demand for the program has been driven primarily by traditional industries, the one we were just talking about. This includes metal products, textiles, plastic, which is petrochemicals, and machinery. And these are all the industries that are not doing well in 2025, that have experienced the deepest declines in orders since U.S. reciprocal tariffs began. Officials say that the goal is not only to preserve export volume, but to help companies reorient their long-term strategies towards markets less vulnerable to geopolitical disruptions. The sheer number of companies applying for help tells us something important. Taiwan's export-heavy growth model is hitting its limits. These firms aren't asking for subsidies because they're inefficient. They're asking because they're trapped in a system designed for a different era. When global trade was stable and Taiwan's population was young, this is probably 10, 20 years ago, it was export first and it made sense. But today, Taiwan is trying to maintain a 20th century industrial structure on top of a 21st century demographic curve. Fewer workers, older workers, and more volatile geopolitics make it harder for traditional industries to stay competitive while carrying the fixed cost of labor and production. Now, this is exactly how countries slip into the kind of vulnerabilities we've seen in Lebanon or Argentina. Too much reliance on external markets, not enough investment in domestic capacity, and unless Taiwan begins shifting its economic center of gravity inwards, external shocks will keep landing harder each year. Now, the reason I mentioned Lebanon is because back in the 80s or 90s, they pegged their currency to the US dollars, which made import cheaper, but it also disrupted domestic economy because with that much that's being cheaply imported, there's no need to build different sectors that are self-sufficient. And of course, you can see how this becomes a problem when there are external factors and you can't just use, traditional tools to control inflation, such as interest rate hikes to temper these different influences. And Argentina is a country that is very export driven. Agriculture is a large percentage of their GDP. They're also at the whims of countries who want to buy agricultural products from them or not. And of course, very susceptible to geopolitical changes. Now, this leads us directly to the next point. If Taiwan wants to rebalance the economy, it needs to invest in sectors tied to domestic well-being, not just export volume. And this, we're talking about TSMC, right? We're talking about semiconductor chips that's being heavily exported, but what about the domestic markets? This week, healthcare emerges as one of the clearest area where Taiwan's internal needs and future economic strategy converge. So President Lai Ching-te again took the stage at the Healthcare Plus Expo and framed healthcare as one of Taiwan's next big strategic assets. With more than 2,100 booths and exhibitors from the US, Canada, Japan, and South Korea, Lai said that Taiwan's strength lies in the fusion of medical expertise and advanced technologies, everything from AI to 5G to cloud computing. He highlighted the, quote, Healthy Taiwan policy, which aims to strengthen medical innovation, digital governance, and long-term care systems as the population ages. Lai also pointed to the upcoming National Infectious Disease Biotech, saying that it will accelerate biomedical cooperation worldwide and help Taiwan secure a stronger foothold in global health networks. The expo positioned Taiwan as not just a chip powerhouse, but a country capable of shaping the future of medical technology in the Asia-Pacific region. So the message at the expo fits perfectly with the direction Taiwan needs to take. Healthcare isn't just a public service, it's a growth industry, a workforce stabilizer, and a diplomatic tool, I suppose. And unlike traditional manufacturing, which is under pressure from tariffs and demographic decline, healthcare grows because societies age, not despite it. This means Taiwan has a chance to build an industry that is both domestically anchored and globally competitive. It also gives Taiwan a way to diversify beyond the narrow concentration of ICT and electronics industries, which currently make up more than 75% of our total export. The key is that healthcare carries far less geopolitical risk. People need care regardless of external shocks or tariff cycles. So when Lai calls it a strong partnership between medicine and technology, he's really describing a new economic pillar, one that can help Taiwan stabilize itself from the inside out. And the government isn't just talking about healthcare as an industry, it's trying to elevate healthcare as a form of diplomacy and national security. That brings us to a rare show of coordination between ministries that don't normally move in sync. So Taiwan's foreign, health, and economic ministries held the second meeting of the Medical and Health Diplomacy Advisory Group. Co-chaired by the Foreign Minister Lin and Health Minister Shi, the group agreed to promote a future healthcare sub-fund under APEC to strengthen digital health collaboration, cross-border policy partnerships, and public-private cooperations. Minister Lin added that the economy has to make effort to ensure that medical diplomacy becomes part of Taiwan's broader economic and trade strategy. The goal is to export medical know-how, raise Taiwan's global profile, and then integrate healthcare with foreign affairs in a way that complements rather than competes with Taiwan's established strengths in semiconductors and ICT. Officials call the initiative a way to build long-term international alliances rooted in medical capacity and humanitarian contribution. This is a smart pivot. For years, Taiwan's global visibility has rested mostly on chips and security cooperation. But medical diplomacy gives Taiwan another way to build relationships. One that is human-centered, right, less politically sensitive, and far more accessible to countries that don't participate in, say, semiconductor supply chains. More importantly, it reflects a recognition that Taiwan needs new engines of influence and stability, especially as traditional industries weaken and demographic pressures rise. Healthcare diplomacy works because it builds goodwill, opens new market channels, and strengthens domestic systems at the same time. It also diversifies Taiwan's outward-facing identity. It's not just the country that builds chips, quote-unquote, but the country that saves lives, hopefully. And in a world where public health rises, aging populations and digital medicines are reshaping global priorities, Taiwan's expertise gives it a voice in arenas where even large powers struggle to lead.
Robots, and more robots. Taiwan is showing off how it's bringing AI into the healthcare field. The tech is on display at a major Taipei expo. Officials there talking up the country's strides in medical tech, hoping to strengthen Taiwan's healthcare system and use its progress to help other countries. President Lai Ching-te framing it as a tool for diplomacy to boost Taiwan's image globally. At the expo, more achievements in bringing Taiwanese medical tech to other parts of the world. Here, an organization from the Czech Republic signs an agreement to buy over $200 million worth of medical devices from Taiwan. That equipment will go to sub-Saharan Africa to help support healthcare in the region. Several of Taiwan's Pacific and Caribbean allies are here too, signing an MOU with a Taiwanese company to give these countries their new AI medical imaging technology for free. It turns 2D black and white images into these kinds of 3D images.
So what it helps is that the doctors now, they can show 3D model to patients. Like you and me, we're not doctors, we don't have medical backgrounds. You look at the black and white images, you feel like, I don't understand what they're saying. But now, everything's in 3D. You can see it 360 degrees, how your bone fracture looks like, how the tumor looks like. The doctors can now explain to the patients and their families what is happening to your body.
The company says its AI can also be loaded onto goggles like these, which doctors can wear while performing surgery. Countries that signed, including diplomatic allies Tuvalu, St. Kitts and Nevis, Belize, and St. Vincent, say they want to strengthen their healthcare cooperation with Taiwan.
We look forward to jointly advancing the following: AI-driven medical imaging standardization, 3D and MR clinical education and training programs, cross-border telemedicine and surgical consultation platforms, and clinical demonstration and technology cooperation projects.
For Taiwan, this expo shows it's no longer just a chip powerhouse, but a dynamo across the tech industry. And it hopes to share its strengths in areas like healthcare with partners around the world.
But while Taiwan is trying to expand new forms of soft power abroad, its economy is still deeply exposed to global financial currents, especially the kind that comes from the U.S. Federal Reserve. And that exposure certainly carries its own kind of warning. Economists, they say that Taiwan may face new economic pressure next year if the U.S. Fed interest rate cuts are accelerated under new leadership. While Taiwan's inflation is stable and the central bank has held rates steady for about 6 consecutive quarters, the bigger concern is the performance of export industries already strained by reciprocal tariffs. Analysts say the CBC, that is the Central Bank of the Republic of China, which is Taiwan, may be forced to loosen liquidity further. Not because of domestic conditions, but because Taiwan's economy remains heavily tied to U.S. monetary policy. Some predict half-point cuts in March and June if financial markets weaken. The CBC has already been quietly reducing outstanding NCDs, signaling early liquidity adjustments through open market operations, but economists warn that Taiwan's vulnerability underlines a structural risk, an export model that becomes unstable whenever global financial conditions shift. So this is where the Lebanon-Argentina comparisons start to make sense. Lebanon became dangerously dependent on imports. Lebanon became dangerously dependent on imports, while Argentina became dangerously dependent on export. Taiwan isn't either extreme, but the warning signs rhyme. When one sector, like ICT or electronics, dominate more than 70% of exports, and when the U.S. Federal Reserve can reshape the entire economy with a single rate decision, that's a concentration risk. Taiwan's growth is real. But it's also fragile because it relies on a world that is more unpredictable each year. Healthcare gives Taiwan a chance to rebalance inward. Domestic well-being industries don't move with the Fed or tariff cycles, or at least even if they do move a little bit, there still is domestic needs, domestic demands for these markets. So they create steady jobs, diversify economic risk, and support an aging population. But recognizing that need is one thing, turning it into policy requires political alignment that Taiwan doesn't seem to have currently. And that brings us to the political reality of Taiwan. Who knows what it needs to do? Diversify, strengthen healthcare, stabilize the domestic base, but none of that moves forward if the government itself can't agree on the fundamentals. So President Lai Ching-te warned that opposition parties are blocking the 1.25 trillion new Taiwan dollars special defense budget risk, enabling Beijing's concept of patriots governing Taiwan, mirroring Hong Kong's model under one country, two systems. Speaking to the Taiwan Center Foundation delegation, Lai said Taiwan's security, economic stability, and public welfare depends on a functioning long-term defense strategy, and he contrasted the current situation with previous administrations, noting that defense spending fell below 2% of GDP under President Ma Ying-jeou, for example, leaving Taiwan exposed as China rapidly expanded its military. Lai said Taiwan's current economic success, including an expected 7.37% GDP growth next year, can only be preserved if the country maintains both military deterrence and political autonomy. He urges the legislature to put national priorities ahead of partisan conflict. And this isn't just about defense spending. It's about whether Taiwan can act with the unity and speed required to navigate demographic declines, industrial restructuring, and geopolitical pressure. If the legislature can't pass the defense bill, how will it pass healthcare reform? How is it going to support industrial modernization? How will it build the domestic resilience needed to avoid the traps faced by, say, Lebanon in the late 80s, early 90s, or Argentina right now? And that about wraps up today's stories. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Reefs. Let's continue to explore the socio-political influences of Taiwan that's also impacting countries around the world. I'm Joey Chow, and this is Radio Taiwan International. See you next week.